So we played Bournemouth over the weekend, and a situation for me kind of came to a head where another time there was a match that I just couldn't watch, even though I thought I had found every clever way that I could. And this was at 7:30 in the morning Eastern time, which anybody who knows me will know there's like zero chance of me getting up that early unless I absolutely have to. And I didn't think I absolutely had to because I thought that I would have a replay available to me. Well, it turns out even if I had gotten up, I would have been even more upset at the situation. But basically, so I had talked a couple weeks back about watching the Spanish language version, which was still available to me, right? Mm-hmm. Well, apparently this wasn't on Telemundo. It was on Universo, like just the regular NBC, Spanish language NBC or whatever. And that is not in the cable package that I have available to me. So I could not watch it at all. And the short version is I am now a YouTube TV subscriber. It's like I don't want this to happen again. This match did end up having the full match replay posted to the Arsenal site by the end of the day, but I wanted to watch it earlier. I wanted to watch it before I went out into the world for the day, just a little bit later when it was live. So I signed up for YouTube TV, which will give me not only USA, where I believe this match was, but also NBCSN, which is not broadly available. It's not available, I think, even if I were to sign up for a cable subscription here, I don't think I could get it. So YouTube TV will get me basically everything that I don't have through Peacock. And it's actually cool when you set up YouTube TV, you can tell it which teams you watch, and it'll automatically add those games to your DVR for you when they happen. So I should not ever have to be in this position again, as long as I continue paying $55 a month for the next calendar year after the 10 or 14 day trial is up, and then $65 a year thereafter. I just sign up for what they call their sports package. So it's not like a whole ton of channels. It's the channels that they say you need to watch sports, which from an Arsenal perspective looks like that's true. I don't know if it gets me to watch the Yankees without doing VPN trickery, but yeah. So I now have YouTube TV.
Yeah, the wonderful world of sports on TV. Well, I'm going to tell you something. You didn't miss much.
So yeah, that left me basically having the results spoiled and therefore not terribly caring about seeing the entire full match replay. And I just watched the extended highlights. And so I'm going to be leaning heavily on you for this one. So where do you want to begin the discussion?
Where do we start? Let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about the lineup. The big news, and we didn't really touch on this in the Sporting game. So I talked about one of the players I really liked in Sporting against Sporting was Martin Odegaard. I thought he did a really good job sort of controlling the play. You can see the value he brings to the side, et cetera, et cetera. We've said all these things so many times before. He came off at about the 70th minute. Now, my general thought was, and it looked like he had kind of gotten a knock, but I think we both all kind of had the sense that Odegaard's not going to go the full 90 minutes. That's not
at this point.
Working his way back from injury, we're not expecting that. Turns out he was actually hurt in that moment, and was unavailable for this game, as was Calafiori, as was Timber, although that wasn't new, as was Saka, still not back yet. We have a tremendous amount of depth in this squad, and it's good because we actually are using quite a lot of it. I do think, I do think we've talked about the lack of rotation and everything. I think to a certain extent, and I suppose I could argue we should see a little more Christian Norgard at times, but I do think a big thing that we've just kind of, it's been something we've had to push through, and we've done a good job overall to this point. But one of the things we've had to push through is that old sense of the cluster injuries, right? That it's not that you have X number of guys get hurt. It's that all these guys who play the same position get hurt.
Right.
And so you have, how many times have we seen either White or Timber at right back and just, and some of you cross your fingers because the other one isn't on the bench. You can't play, we can't do it. And this one, I look at this lineup. I mean, you had Raya in starting, Gabriel and Saliba, of course. Ben White plays right back, which, as we said, he's had some struggles as of late. Miles Lewis-Skelly comes in at left back. And I'll be honest, I thought he was actually okay in the Bournemouth game. I certainly, but also some of that's a little bit of some of the poor performances he's put in previous weeks. We've got the midfield, Rice, Zubimendi, and Havertz. Havertz is not really our best creative hub. I think he does combine okay with Gyökeres, but it's not quite his strength. And Rice and Zubimendi is a very kind of very defensive midfield. And then you've got, Madueke and then Gyökeres. And I think Gyökeres has been better as of late, but still, we sort of see some of his limitations. And then again, players of limitations, Madueke. And I mean, look, Martinelli, Madueke, Gyökeres is not a very dangerous front line. How many times have we've seen that a couple times this year? We know what they're not really capable of. And so, yeah, it's a kind of a lineup you look at and just sort of say, man, this is against it's not as good as you would like at this stage of the season. And against a Bournemouth team that has given us problems. Like Bournemouth is not Bournemouth's a team that's generally played us very well over the last couple of seasons. And, none of this, by the way, excuses the fact that it was a pretty dreadful performance. Like, let's not, I don't want to make excuses for what happened. This team needs to be better. They need to be more forward thinking. They need to be more, I hate to say just play with more confidence, but you have the best record in England. You have the best record in the Champions League. Like, I'm sorry. You have why is there a lack of, it feels like there's a lack of confidence. Where does that come from? I mean, are they tired? Sure. Zubimendi's clearly knackered, but it's frustrating because the game, let's be honest, was a giant egg. It was not good.
Yeah, so let's get into some of the details there. So from what I saw on the highlights, it looked like we had a pretty bad lapse that resulted in that first goal. You want to tell me more about what happened there?
Right. So the winger comes down on that right side, or the Bournemouth player comes down the right side. And I don't think it was Tavernier, or maybe it was Truffert who was coming down. I honestly don't remember all of them, so I want to be careful about names just so I don't get them wrong. But they had a player coming down the wing, and my impression watching that, and they talked about this a little bit on the show. By the way, I watched this game at home because I didn't really want to drive out at 6:30 in the morning. I don't want to. I woke up for 6:30, but so I got a little bit more of the actual commentary, and then I usually get. And I mean, they blamed, and I think rightly so, Madueke. Kind of, he notices the man before he makes the run, and then he kind of turns away and just kind of loses him. And it's a great pass in, sort of like we talked about with Sporting. It's a really good pass to find him, but it's a good pass. He makes the pass, and then the ball comes in, and it deflects off Saliba. Is it a little lucky? The deflection sort of allows Junior Krupi to be free on the far post. Yeah, but I think that's a lot of little errors adding up, and all of a sudden you find yourself down on a goal that frankly they deserved. It worked it well. We made a mistake. I mean, you look at it and it looks like Ben White should be stepping out, but White clearly seems to think it should be Madueke following him because White's tracking another runner into the box. It's just poor.
The guy who serves up that cross, like he was just in a playland. He could have done anything over there. Right. No one near him. Yeah.
And it's frustrating because that's the kind of play that they like as a team. You think at least they know better, and it does. How much of that is mental exhaustion? Like, in a lot of ways, tiredness doesn't always reveal itself in terms of players being slow. It's mental exhaustion, like guys switching off. But I don't know. White sure they did give Madueke a look, and we know Madueke is not as defensively responsible as Saka or even Martinelli, and so it's one of those moments you kind of watch and go, "Oh dear, that's not great. It's not great." Yeah, and now we're chasing the game.
Yeah, luckily this time, though, we didn't need to chase it for a very long time before we had what looked to me like a case of ball to hand, which we've talked about not really mattering so much in England because it was a handball in the box.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. I've heard some random comments, or read, I should say, random comments floating around about, oh, I don't know, was it a penalty or not? Like, hands in an unnatural position. It's way out from his arm. It's way out from his body, and it hits him in the hand. I don't think it's deliberate. I don't think he's sticking it out to make a play or anything. But that's a handball. This is not a complicated. Michael Oliver even kind of takes a moment and goes, "Oh yeah, penalty." Like there's a pause, but then he goes and points right to the spot, and VAR confirms that's a penalty. And what frustrates me about that is obviously that play comes off of a kind of a scramble following a corner, and Gabriel, I think, is the one who kicks it and hits into the defender's hand. To me, that's the kind of thing we should be able or willing to do a little bit more of, like throw the ball into the box, into those situations. And it seems like at times we're content to kind of pass the ball around a little bit. Like, we have no problem slinging it in from corners. Like, why not try a cross in? And look, I know it's a lower percentage play. I know obviously Gabriel isn't camped out on the other team's penalty spot, in those situations, but I feel like there's some value in sort of creating some chaos in those opportunities, especially when so many teams do such a good job packing the box and preventing chances. Look, Bournemouth wasn't sitting 10 men behind the ball and daring us to break them down. They weren't parking the bus. But we had a couple of times where we just couldn't get a clean look on goal because there were defenders back and ready. And this is kind of one of those things that, like, just start, I don't say just constantly pump it in the box, but try it a couple times, and you're going to find yourself in a situation where they're going to make mistakes. I mean, we talked about this with all those own goals we got earlier in the year, right? On some level, yeah, it's an own goal. It feels like it doesn't really count. How many of those did we generate and say to ourselves, look, if the defender doesn't touch it, we've got a man there? So that's the kind of thing that I kind of watch, and just like, those are the opportunities you create for yourself. And it just feels like we've kind of lost that, which is frustrating because in terms of the penalty, they give it to Gyökeres. I mean, that makes that look easy, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I see he's becoming our penalty taker, which is what you would expect. And yeah, he's been doing a good job. I mean, as I was talking to my son while we were watching the highlights, I was like, look, that keeper guessed the right way. The ball was inches away from his hands. There's nothing he could have done about that. I mean, even if he'd gotten a hand to it, it was just hit so hard. And that was going in. Yeah.
That ball, the ball's hit is hit exactly the way it needs to be. And, that's that's why the benefit of the doubt on these penalties almost always goes to the striker, right? Because there's so many different ways for so many different things that the keeper won't be able to stop or anything.
Yeah.
And a guy like Gyökeres, he kicks the ball hard. He does. And there it is. It's 1-1. And at that point, especially coming into the half, you sort of feel like, okay, get to halftime, regroup. Second half, we can really kind of push through and take over. And that simply didn't happen. That we simply did not play particularly well. I thought we were. I don't say how do I want to say this? I don't think we were like abject in the sense that, like, there were points in the Southampton game where they were completely bossing us and we were struggling to stay in the game. Ultimately, we ended up paying for that. Zubimendi has a bad giveaway in his own end. They kind of swamp us defensively. We look like we're scrambling a bit, and it's a nice finish. But it's 2-1 to Bournemouth, and you can't say they didn't deserve it.
Yeah, it stinks. I mean, I saw in the highlights there was a moment before that where Victor Gyökeres was offside, didn't time his run right again, and scored, but had it called back. That is something he needs to work on, it looks like.
Well, that one I actually wouldn't have blamed on him. That was he actually, that one's not on him. He makes the run early. The pass comes in late, so that's when the pass has to be released. That was one if you watch the replay, I think the pass needs to be let go a little sooner to get to him.
Okay.
But I also think that one, it's interesting that it frustrated me in real time because he looked pretty offside, and then they do that thing where they let the whole play run out,
right?
And then they call it back with the offside. But you're just like, I don't know, he looked pretty clearly offside from the beginning there.
Right.
They showed the replay. One of the Bournemouth defenders is a little bit further back, like he's on the. So Gyökeres is on like the center of the field, but towards the far sideline, and the Bournemouth defender on the near side is actually a little closer than I thought.
Yeah.
So maybe that did make a little more sense. But it is kind of frustrating sometimes when you see those clear offside they don't call and just like let it run out even though they're going to bring it back. So that one was a little frustrating. But again, I think that one's more on the pass than Gyökeres.
Okay, that's a fair take. So yeah, the Zubamendi lapse led to them pulling ahead and ended up winning.
Yeah, I mean, we generated a couple opportunities on corners, but you know, at that point, it's feeling a little desperate to grab a point at home, and we just kind of looked throughout, like we just. I guess that's the question. Like, I've generally tried to put a very positive face on the season, and I'm a positive person. I think that's just part of my nature. But also, as I've talked about, like, this is something you do for fun, right? To watch this team and have a good time. It's recreational. And so to me, it's just more interesting to be generally optimistic about it. And I think for the most part, our record has justified optimism. And look, we've had poor performances throughout the season, but every team has poor performances scattered throughout the season. But they do appear to be stacking up a little bit. And I understand people are going to take issue with my interpretation of the Sporting match. I don't think it was a particularly poor performance on our part. I think that was much more deliberate and calculated. But a 1-0 win sandwiched around, losses in every other competition, the Carabao Cup, the FA Cup, and then the league. Yeah, and to competition, frankly, okay, City's pretty good, but I mean, losing to Southampton, losing to Bournemouth, like this is, it does start to pile up a little bit. It does kind of make you wonder, like, obviously we've talked about the physical nature of this and the way the injuries have hit us this season. And certainly sort of physical tiredness is the kind of thing you can see, but that's not really the conversation that surrounds us. A lot of what we're seeing is a conversation that kind of surrounds sort of our mental exhaustion or really our mental fortitude. And we talked about this a couple of years ago. City, edges us over the line and Rodri's there talking about like they have the mentality and Arsenal doesn't. And at the time, I thought that was kind of nonsensical. And I still think it is. I think that's self-fulfilling prophecy. But at this point, it is hard to sort of watch their performance in these games and not feel like they're just, in hockey, you'd say they're gripping their sticks too tight, or in baseball, they're squeezing the bat. Like they're playing like they're afraid to lose. And it is kind of frustrating to watch. I don't know. I mean, as you're watching through this, I mean, obviously you only got the highlights here, but you've been a little more nervous about this than I have in the last couple of weeks, right?
A little bit. It's just we've had a lot of lackluster performances going on just even the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks. Obviously, the cup defeats were big, but not isolated incidents on their own. I mean, like we've seen here and in other matches where we've just not put our A game forward. I mean, how much of that do you think is exhaustion physically versus mentally? Like if you had and the lineup, it's tough to put our fingers on like what could be happening, I guess, but I don't know. I don't know where I land on it ultimately. Like, what if you had to pick like a single overriding factor? What do you think? It's just fixture congestion, or do you think it is just like once we had the one big defeat in the cup final that we've been down on ourselves since then, or something?
I don't think it's that. I also don't think you can really narrow it to one thing. I do think, I think the fixture congestion plays a role in it, but I mean, City perfectly fairly will be able to point out they're dealing with effectively the same thing. Obviously there's talent. I think the injuries, we talked about this a little bit at the start of talking about this game. I think they play a bit of a role in that, the way they've been clustered. I know one of the big criticisms of Arteta is the lack of rotation. There hasn't really been as many moments you would want to be able to do that because guys have been dealing with this injury and that injury. And so it makes it's not as if you can just suddenly turn around and go, well, okay, then we'll just rest this guy. Well, we can't.
Right.
He's right now our right wing. And again, are there moments against certain opposition in other places where we could have perhaps rested certain players? Yeah. I mean, I will kind of bang the drum that we probably should have seen Norgard in the Premier League a little bit more often than we have. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that you can really point to any one particular factor. You know, I mean, we look at the style of play. We're kind of a grinding team. We're not, you know, a high octane swashbucklers who are going to go end to end. That's just not the way this team is built to play. That's not the way this team wants to play. I mean, you know, in terms of the aesthetics of it, I don't really care. I'm pragmatic enough. Like I especially after the last couple of years, like I you know, if this is the best way to win, then they should do it. You know, they don't look like winning much of anything right now, but I hesitate to point it to really any one thing. And we've talked about this a little bit. I think the bottlers, right, that Arsenal always collapses down the stretch, I think is not an accurate reflection of what's happened over the last 3 seasons. I think it's somewhat fair to say in, what was the first one we saw, 22-23? I think it's somewhat fair then, but mostly in the context of they were too young, it was too soon, you know, and they ended up falling out of it, into the Europa League spots. I think the next year we dropped points in 2 games from the start of the calendar year. If that's your definition of bottling, then that word has no meaning whatsoever. You know, City did the one thing they had to do was win every game. And so the Villa loss was frustrating, but it's hard for me to get there. And then last year, as much as we talked about Liverpool's weaknesses, we were behind them constantly. How close did we really get at any point? What, 5 points, 6 points? Right. Like Liverpool was kind of able to keep everyone at arm's length all season. So again, the idea that there's somehow this collapse in the club or in the players or chokers or any of that is just not reflective in how any of these seasons have played out. That being said, right now they are really kind of falling at the final hurdles, and it does feel, it is starting to get a little disturbing, especially as we start heading into, obviously we have the big game next week